Hi guys, it's now week 5 of the 100 Days of Making Comics challenge, so that officially puts me past the 1/3 mark. In this week's video, I wanted to talk about the things that I've noticed while actually making comics, what I've noticed that makes the act special, and how it specifically is different from drawing illustrations, which is the normal work that I do. This is less of a motivational talk like week 3's video, although I do hope it will be motivating too. But instead, it's going to be more of a video about my own experiences and what specifically the act of making comics has to offer, separate from other mediums. So it'll be a little bit more grounded and a little bit more specific to what I myself have noticed. I was kind of surprised at how much comics had to offer me. It's definitely humbled me a little bit. I've heard a lot about how drawing comics is good for an artist and it'll really help you improve, and how it's a good thing for beginners to just start a comic because it'll give them a lot of drawing experience. And if I'm completely honest, I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit at this one in the beginning just because I'm not exactly a beginner with art. I thought I've already drawn a ton and I've already gotten a lot of that early mileage over and done with, so maybe I wouldn't see that much improvement. But I think I can say now that I was wrong in thinking that. There's just been so many things in my comic that I just would not have even attempted to draw if the scene didn't specifically call for it. I can say pretty confidently that I just never would have bothered otherwise. There's been panels where I've had to draw animals, or research specific gestures and the way that emotion plays out, or how to draw fire, or just how to get a specific angle to look right because that's what I see in my head and I really think it would be cool to have that in the comic. There's just been a lot of times where I've struggled to get it to look right, something that doesn't happen nearly as often when I stick to maybe easier, more comfortable character illustrations. There's only so many ways you can pose a character if they don't have anything specific that they need to be doing, and if you don't have anything that strongly in mind. So while I don't think my illustration work is too repetitive, there's a lot of face-up busts, I'll say that much. Another thing that I've noticed that comics has to offer me, while I don't necessarily think this is a specific struggle of mine, is that it's really good for background practice. I really love drawing environments, and I've had so much fun just being able to go ham with it. I'll be doing an entire video on this specifically next week because I have a lot to say about it, but yeah, it's just been great for that. And of course, this is dependent on your comic's subject matter, but it can be a great opportunity to learn about something new. I found out a lot about medieval times that I didn't know before, like how they did bathe, and they went to bathhouses, and blue dye wasn't nearly as rare as you might think, and they also had access to things like sugar, although it was rare, and gingerbread. I didn't think that was a medieval thing, but gingerbread was around there too. I'm also kind of obsessed with the illuminations in medieval books too, especially the combinations of text and art. It was sort of weird, and in places it did sort of resemble comics and speech bubbles. They're also interesting and experimental because they kind of weren't the established art fundamentals that we have today, at least as we know them. So they weren't widely taught or even considered the ideal way to do art back then. So you get a lot of like weird experimental stuff going on, and there's this own charm to it. And I'll definitely be looking back on that for inspiration as print sitting might need it, even though print sitting absolutely is not historically accurate, really. Back on topic, it's in something like a comic where you need to put your art in service of something, that things like perspective, gesture, composition, all of these things, they start to make sense. You have a context in which you need to apply these things rather than just trying to make a cool image. You're much more likely to run into far more specific problems that you then have to tackle when the story sort of forces you to confront these things rather than being able to change an illustration to something easier. I know that that's a trap that I've fallen into quite a bit. If the story calls for a character looking sad, I need to be able to draw that specific version of sad to match the scene and match the character. If I need a character to perform a certain action for the story to make sense, I can't just choose another pose like I maybe could with an illustration. To make it clear on what exactly is going on in a scene, maybe I have to stage it from a certain angle, so perspective now has a purpose too, and maybe I've used a certain composition too frequently to where it's starting to look repetitive, so I have no choice but to change things up with a different shot. Just things like that where there's this sense of stubbornness to what you need to deliver. It kind of goes nicely with the first idea about how you are sort of forced to draw things that you otherwise might not. I personally didn't get the same kind of payoff when I was working with visual novels. VN asset creation works a little bit differently from my experience. Not that I'm against project work, I think it's a good idea to have a project going for your art in general. I'm just saying that comics and visual novels do kind of offer different things. It's great background practice, but you're kind of limited in that you need to pick a shot that shows off the location really well, because usually you only have 1, maybe 2 background images per location. And then with that shot, normally you have to keep the angle at about the same height as your main character's eye level, or the character that you're viewing the story through, because otherwise things can start looking mismatched when you lay your character sprite artwork over the top. And for the sprites, you usually want more basic poses for your characters, because you need an artwork that can be used for many situations in the story, and it's really easy to suffer from scope creep if you're not careful. And you also usually keep the artworks at around eye level with whoever your protagonist is, again with that making sure that things don't look mismatched. I am aware in visual novels, of course, you can have CGs or special artworks that aren't limited quite like that, but they are sort of event artworks or character artworks if you're playing like an otome kind of style game. But again, they are sort of there for the special moments, and I think expecting an entire visual novel to be CGs is a huge amount of work and maybe not worth it. I don't know. I do like them, but it is a lot of work. With comics, you have more freedom to move the camera around much more and draw the character performing much more specific actions. It has its downsides, of course. It's a lot more art involved usually than a visual novel. And for me, I have to simplify the rendering down a bit to make sure that the workload is manageable, but I think it is worth it. So to sum it all up, I think comics is a game about widening your range. I don't get to sit and render out a panel for days on end like maybe I would with a big illustration, but I'm having to draw a lot of different things and draw them to sort of an acceptable base level. Comics are allowing me to build a better sense of flexibility into my work, and I'm gaining the confidence that I can draw a lot of different things, not just sort of stick to the few things that I know how to do relatively well. I'm still fairly early in my comics journey. It's only been, a couple of months since I started working on this project, but I think as time goes on, I'll learn what else comics has to offer. And I think the idea of a wider range is really powerful, and it's motivating me to keep on making comics, as well as just, I'm enjoying the process intrinsically, and, the improvement aspect is just a nice thing to have on top of that. So that's about it for this week. Today's also the 30th my time, which means that there'll be a new episode of Print Sitting up today over on Instagram and Twitter. And you can check out all of what's out of Print Sitting over on Webtoons, and I'll have a link to all of that in the description down below. Next week, I want to talk specifically about backgrounds and sort of what I love about them. Also maybe how I approach them and how I got to a point where I'm comfortable with them. I get a lot of comments asking about that, so I'll try my best to cover it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you back next week for that.